Okay, well, thank you very much for having us. I'm Jeff Collins. I'm the Trust and Safety Director at Amazon Web Services, AWS. And thanks to everyone for coming. We'll try to make this useful, and we'll try to leave some time for questions. I'm here with Amanda Voles from Thorn and Tim Nagel from Tech Against Terrorism. We're going to get back to them shortly and do much more thorough introductions. But what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a short overview of what we do in trust and safety at AWS, and then we're going to try to tell a little bit of our story through our customers, which is how we like to do it. So a little bit about myself. I've been at AWS almost 4 years, and I've been doing trust and safety for about a decade. I worked at a US startup called After School. It was a popular teen social network, and then I worked at TikTok for a while, really kind of standing up and building their trust and safety teams. And now at AWS, which is quite a bit different, and we'll get into that shortly. And I also, before I moved to tech, I worked in government as a diplomat. I've worked with civil society quite a lot. And so I really bring that lens to my work. And I think one of the themes we will hit on here today, and that you see throughout this conference, is given the complexity and the changing nature of the internet abuse, the activity that we're trying to work against, we really need to work together across sectors and then across different parts of the tech stack. A little bit about AWS. So most of you are probably familiar with us. A lot of trust and safety conferences, you don't talk to cloud companies, but we're a cloud service provider. And we have a whole range of services from compute to classic storage to databases, now to Gen AI. And we think of ourselves as providing building blocks for our customers. And many of the big companies that are represented here are our customers. And so we try to provide technology that enables them to really power their business. When it comes to trust and safety, what we do, it's somewhat similar to user-generated content companies in that we essentially enforce our rules for AWS. For us, that's our acceptable use policy. And what that means is if there's an AWS customer who is in some way using AWS services for bad activity, and that could be what we call activity abuse, like DDoS attacks, but it could also be content abuse, which could be child sexual abuse material or terrorist content, then we will take action to enforce our AUP, and we do that by working to really try to support our customers to figure out what's happening and make sure that they mitigate the violative activity, and if they don't, we will take action. But a lot of times what we see is big customers who themselves have a bunch of customers, and they're really working with us on the same page to try to figure out what's happening and try to end it. So that's a little bit of what we do. And as I said, what we want to do here today is explore that in practice. So instead of me telling you about how we do this, we want to show you through talking to some of our customers. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with some just overviews that Amanda and Tim are going to give us about their organizations and then what they generally do. And then we're going to move into some questions about challenges, threats that they're seeing, and then what they're trying to do to innovate to address them. And then we'll cover a few other topics, and then we'll try to open it up for questions. So let's start with general introductions. Amanda Voles from Thorn.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me and inviting me to join you on this panel, Jeff. I'm really thrilled to be here. I work for Thorn. I'm the Vice President of Global Customers and Strategic Partnerships. In my 25 years of professional career, I spent the last 17 of that, it got a gulp, 25 years, the last 17 of that in software, and the last 3 years of that working at Thorn in the trust and safety space. Thorn is a nonprofit, and we develop technical solutions to combat online child exploitation. The only thing that we do, and the sole purpose of our work at Thorn, is to defend children from sexual abuse and eliminate this material from the internet. In order to be a sustainable nonprofit, we are financially supported by generous donors, and then we also license and sell our technology and provide services to industry and law enforcement. My personal focus at Thorn is to be able to offer our products and solutions to industry. That is including SAFER, which is our CSAM detection services that use both hashing and matching, and a CSAM classifier trained on actual CSAM, which makes our tool a little bit different than what you might hear about in the marketplace. SAFER will detect CSAM and allow our users to remove it and report it. Thorn believes that our products are essential to any company that allows for user-generated content, which Jeff mentioned before. This ranges from social media companies to photo and video platforms, gaming, and especially relevant in the last few years, generative AI companies. We also offer consulting services like red teaming and policy development, and serve as subject matter experts across the globe in child safety. I also oversee all of Thorn's strategic partnerships, and one of those is with AWS. It takes a village to do this work and to keep children safe online, and we do that through a variety of different ways. We work with organizations like IWF and NCMEC. We work closely with law enforcement across the globe and provide them with technology that allows them to do their investigative work. We're also known in the ecosystem for our original research, and we conduct that research to support companies to provide them with a better understanding of online child sexual abuse landscape. And last but not least, which has been a hot topic today in our conversation, we strive to affect change at the regulatory level by influencing policymakers and focusing with a clear strategic way to make sure that children are safeguarded today.
Thanks, Amanda. All right, Tim, let's do a short introduction of you and Tech Against Terrorism.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and also lovely to be here. So I'm here on behalf of Tech Against Terrorism. Tech Against Terrorism are a London-based non-profit. We've been operating for the last 7 or 8 years, I believe, and our mission is to combat terrorist use of the internet whilst upholding the rule of law. In short, it's to enable safer online and offline communities from the counter-terror threat. Number of ways in which we do that. We have a number of technical products which we use to be able to both identify the presence of terrorist content online, but also to help in working directly with platforms in the social media or more broad online safety space to help them mitigate the threat of terrorist use of the internet. We also have a whole team of threat intelligence analysts who are very focused on understanding the nature of the terrorist threats and identifying ways in which social media and online companies can adapt to it, and helping provide recommendations and through the form of threat assessments for those particular organizations. And then we also, in some scenarios as well, identify the presence of significant terror threats and help surface that to law enforcement or governments where necessary. In terms of my role, I'm product lead, so my responsibility is to lead the development of technical products. That's both through innovation and helping drive forward technical standards within this space, but also the support of our technical products with which we have direct customers within the industry space.
Thanks to both of you. And I think what's really important to recognize here is both of these organizations have really been pioneers in internet safety. When I think to my somewhat long experience in trust and safety, I remember seeing both organizations at their early days. When GIFCT was founded, Tech Against Terrorism was really responsible for a great part of that initiative, and then developing the way we're trying to deal with terrorist activity online right now. And then similarly, Thorn, one of the early NGOs working on minor safety issues. And so it's been really amazing to see both these organizations blossom. So I want to start with a really general question. We've been thinking and hearing about what are the really worrisome challenges we're seeing online, what are some of the threats we're dealing with. I really liked the discussion on AI chatbots used by bad actors this morning. So things are getting more complex. We're having to deal with bad actors moving at a much more rapid pace. Things in general are really accelerating. So I'm curious to just hear generally from both of you, what are you most worried about? What are the biggest challenges you're thinking about in each of your spaces? So maybe, Tim, starting with you. For Tech Against Terrorism, what are the things over the last year and then now and then looking into the coming years that are really top of mind for you?
Yeah, so I think the threat is really dependent on where you're looking and in terms of the types of sites and the types of platforms where things are originating from. I think what we're seeing is that there continues to be a proliferation of terrorist content on some of your mainstream tech platforms. I think that's particularly largely due to the volume and the audience with which they can reach from their perspective, as well as some of the challenges those sites are having in terms of scaling their content moderation and being able to adapt to some of the shifts in behavior. Coupled with that, we're also seeing a very strong theme of outlinking from those sites onto some of the more niche or fringe sites where where things might be less regulated and where people might be more able to spread terrorist ideology. I think what we're also seeing is a particular trend and something which we've been particularly trying to counter in the last couple of years of some of these organizations spinning up their own websites. These terrorist-operated websites are also areas which are very, very challenging to moderate, very, very challenging for us to be able to help police and to help enforce. And so there's a particular challenge of the adversarial shift of if you do a good job in terms of being able to moderate certain areas, they may move elsewhere, and they may find themselves in areas where there is really not any there is not so much oversight, there isn't so much control within those particular spaces. But I'm interested if you agree.
Yeah, I certainly do. It was one of the big challenges that we faced in the child safety ecosystem is that perpetrators will move around, which I think is what you're saying, that once you it's like whack-a-mole. Once you fix one area, then another going to pop up in another area, and that's really the most challenging that we hear from our customers. But, if I think about your question, Jeff, when it comes to what are some of the challenges that we're facing, I think about the trust and safety teams and the challenges that they're facing, because they're the ones that are having to kind of deal with this and try to mitigate some of that risk. And I think some of the biggest challenges that they have is lack of resources or access to resources, or always trying to have to sell to their leadership why they need more resources in order to do the work that they do, and the value of the work that trust and safety professionals do. So it's not even just about trust and safety professionals having the resources, but resources to have solutions like the ones that you and I provide to these organizations. And then the engineering bandwidth to be able to deploy and maintain and moderate. It really is not a easy or cheap thing to do, really, to keep our platform safe. So, we constantly strive to try to find ways to be able to not only educate the industry. Somebody was talking about parents earlier, making sure that parents and children and young people have the education they need, but really providing these resources to the trust and safety community so they can do what they need to do.
That's a really good point. And I've seen that at a number of different companies, and now I have the privilege of representing Amazon on the board of NCMEC, the U.S. National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And so I kind of get to see behind the scenes of how NCMEC is constantly dealing with budgetary issues and really trying to get government funding and then private sector funding. And you would think that for something like child sexual exploitation and abuse that, it wouldn't be hard to get funding, but it just is. So it's a really good point. There's a limited pool of resources, and we're all trying to use them efficiently, which leads to my next question. So as we see this acceleration of threats, we in trust and safety teams and organizations like yours, we have to think how to innovate quickly, and then how to scale. And so given the concerns and challenges you've outlined, I'm curious if you could share with us some of the innovations that you're developing, that you're using and leveraging in your work. So maybe start with you, Amanda. Thorn's really been on, as I said, the cutting edge of child safety and technology for a long time. Things have changed a lot. But given this current landscape, what are some of the things that you are using for innovation?
It's unusual to be a nonprofit that develops and provides solutions and technology and provides that. So that makes us. And your organization quite unusual, but I think it's really the only way. We have to combat the bad actors that are putting forth this, using technology to do bad things, and be able to combat them using technology. I will say that Amazon Web Services is our primary cloud provider at Thorn, and they help us in many ways through that, through developing our products and operations and data science and the research that we do, and just internal operation support. And we use AWS exclusively to do this work, and their support has allowed for us to scale our technologies. And I'm not just saying this because I'm up here with Jeff, but it's really true. We save costs. We're able to invest the costs that we save back into our mission and develop solutions like ML and AI classifiers to essentially save children's lives. So our CSAM classifier is the most innovative solution I think that we've ever developed, and that's used to support the trust and safety team. It identifies potentially novel image and video-based CSAM by analyzing thousands of attributes within the content to predict the likelihood that this image or video could contain CSAM. Our customers use this classifier to really help their work and to make them more efficient. They customize their workflows to develop a strategic detection plan. They can hone in on high-risk accounts. They can expand their child sexual abuse detection and coverage. They can prioritize and escalate in order to make themselves more efficient. And then, of course, finding this actionable content in their users' queues to save moderation team time, which is really essential. Kind of goes back to the resources point that I made earlier. And then recently, we've also developed a text classifier to analyze messages. So this is something that's been new for Thorn in the past year or so, and it's done to analyze conversations at the text level related specifically to CSAM, maybe a user saying they have access to a child. It can detect sextortion and grooming. Those kinds of topics that come up, it analyzes line by line and then can maybe make some assumptions based on the conversation that's happening too. And that's all done with AI and machine learning that we use that's powered by AWS.
Amazing. So Tim, you have you sit at a good position to really have insight into the technology. And one thing that I know you've worked a lot on is the Terrorist Content Analytics Platform, or TCAP. Did I get that right, Terrace?
Yes, absolutely.
But you've done a whole host of other things at Tech Against Terrorism in terms of technology. So when you think about innovation, what are some of the things top of mind for you to really take on this ever-evolving series of terrorist threats?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to innovation, we look at it in a few ways. I think, how can we innovate in terms of the identification and detection of content, but also how can we innovate in terms of understanding and analyzing and categorizing content to a greater extent? And then thirdly, how can we innovate in terms of how we can serve that and how we can support industry and some of the broader organizations to a greater extent. So that's been a huge amount of our effort over the course of many years. As you say, one of our key products is the Terrorist Content Analytics Platform, or TCAP. That uses AI to be able to detect and identify the presence of content from social media sites. But also it uses AI to be able to categorize, and it sounds very similar to some of the things that Thorn has done to be able to understand more about that particular content. Through the support of AWS, both in terms of from their technical expertise, in terms of guiding some of our systems development, but also similarly in terms of some of the support that they directly had in terms of development grants. We have also developed hash sharing capabilities. So we have the TCAP archive, which is the world's first database of terrorist content, and we are helping platforms deconflict some of their content from their sites based on the information which we have been collecting through the business of monitoring and collecting terrorist content online. So yeah, we're really super proud of this work, and it's delivering a lot of impact in terms of helping some of the broader industry talent challenges of making sure that they can take down content from when it first pops up from some of those sources where it originates before it ends up on their site.
What are some of the types of companies that you support and work with? I mean, big, small, medium?
I would say it's it's a real variety. I think we've got some very large organisations, and there are some very significant. Not at liberty to name them, but we've got some very significant messaging sites. We've got even some file sharing platforms. We've got some jobs boards that are really interested, and because we have lots of different ways in terms of serving this data up, be it in terms of being able to prevent against outlinking or specific types of content which they're seeing. We have a huge variety of platforms who are getting value from these services.
Got it. Okay, so I'm going to ask about Gen AI. We can't really have one of these discussions without it in this day and age. There's been some really interesting discussions so far today, and one of the things I often I've thought about the last few years is that there's this explosion of this new technology, but a lot of times the abuse that we see in the trust and safety world is still really kind of old school, like things that we've seen before, like cheap fakes instead of deep fakes. But that has changed over the last year or so. And now we're starting to see like this explosion of these Nudify apps in the child safety realm, and like just much more effective, realistic depictions that come from Gen AI. And so I'm curious to hear from both of you what you're seeing in terms of Gen AI being used by bad actors. Are we really starting to see this proliferation of bad actors harnessing, leveraging Gen AI for their activity? Have we kind of hit that point yet where we're seeing that? Or are we still dealing with a lot of the kind of old school kind of abuse? Have we hit that tipping point? So maybe let's just start with that, Amanda.
Really provocative question there. I would say that we've definitely hit that tipping point, and the content that is out there has really created some significant implications in the child safety ecosystem. Generative AI really changed how child sexual abuse occurs online and how we can combat it. So as tech companies and organizations race to keep up with these new advancements, Thorn still works hard to defend children as this develops, just like we do with all new technologies as they emerge. We really try hard to stay ahead of it. So we've been working on this for about 2.5, 3 years. I remember very clearly when we started hearing more and more about CSAM in the generative AI space and what that meant for our organization, and how organizations came to us to say, like, oh my gosh, what do I do and how do I fix this, and does your solutions detect AI generated CSAM? And there was really a general panic, and how we chose to respond to that panic. I'm really proud of the way that we reacted to it. I have this little stat here, Jeff, I'm going to share with you. The IWF reports that there was a sharp rise in AI-generated CSAM, with 99% found on public sites rather than hidden on the dark web. Worse, 78% of reports came from people who stumbled upon this content via forums and AI galleries. That means the vast majority of this criminal imagery is being accidentally encountered by the general public. Versus maybe in the past where people were out seeking that information. So the problem with AI-generated CSAM is it is overwhelming to investigators. They're already trying to face the uphill battle with the sheer volumes of regular CSAM, if you will. Now there's this AI-generated material that makes it even harder for them to identify the real victims. Bad actors are manipulating and creating CSAM to groom and blackmail. And so sextortion has become a particularly hot topic right now with bad actors, and they are utilizing some of these AI-generated images to sextort their victims. It's really easy to create this content now, so it's a much lower barrier than this, this cheap content that you referred to earlier. You had to at least have some Photoshop skills, but nowadays that's not the case with AI-generated CSAM. And so it really kind of, I think that the hardest thing for me, and when I think about this as a human in society and as a mother, is that, the ease of generating this content without a real child, it really presents this fuel of misconception that it's harmless, and that continues to perpetrate the abuse. Another aspect of generative AI CSAM that I'm concerned about is that these AI models support the predators and offering explicit instructions on how to create the abuse, and making it even easier for them. So it further complicates things. And essentially, we just need to have safeguards. We need to be sure that we have ethical principles and mitigations are implemented with generative AI companies to protect kids. And safety by design is a key way to do this. I'm happy to talk about that too in a little bit if you'd like.
Yeah, those are really good points, because we've all seen the last few years this fear, and it was really just initially this theory that Gen AI was really going to be leveraged by bad actors, and we were going to see like an explosion of phishing campaigns, but we didn't really see that at first. And now, as you explain, like we're really seeing that in the minor safety area, and it is creating a lot of challenges because there's always been this challenge of separating out the noise from the signal, and with this explosion of new, essentially reports to NCMEC and others, it's really challenging for them to process and to figure out like what's bad and what are the leads that they can actually use. And that highlights that this really is a technology problem because I'm watching NCMEC really try to modernize the way they deal with the volume and really scale their work. But the Gen AI, how it's being leveraged in the child safety space, it really does highlight these challenges. So what about in Tech Against Terrorism's work and in the terrorist space? How are you seeing Gen AI leveraged by bad actors? And then, conversely, how helpful is it to you in your work?
Yeah, so I think within the counter-terrorist space, I think we're very much still on the upward curve. I think we're not seeing the signs that it's slowing down, and I think the tipping point is probably still somewhat ahead of us. I think from our perspective, it's certainly used and is continuing to be exploited, particularly by individuals. I think from what we see, it's particularly used for the likes of individuals who want to glorify certain perpetrators. That being said, we believe that it's still yet to be fully operationalized by some of the organized groups, and that is a threat which is an inevitability and is going to come. It's a question of when, not if, it's going to happen, and we all need to be fully prepared for when that happens. I think the particular ways in which Gen AI will be particularly exploited within the counter-terrorist space, obviously there's the production perspective of being able to create new things and be able to create new propaganda just to ramp up the volume, but also from a manipulation perspective, so taking existing things, for example, live streams of particular terror attacks, and be able to manipulate them in a way to evade some of the more traditional content moderation techniques which are out there.
So I'm going to ask one final question, and then in the audience, start thinking about questions, because we're going to open it up to you. Anything that we've covered or haven't covered is open game. So Amanda, going to your comment on safety by design, in the trust and safety space, we're often trying to be preventative, trying to help our companies or those we work with prevent bad activity or abuse before it occurs. But the reality is we're usually dealing in trust and safety operations with bad activity that's already happened. So it's really both, but we'd love to shift our emphasis a lot of times to deal with that preventative aspect. And there are different ways to do that. Safety by design is one of the most important, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And then also this idea of collaboration that I mentioned at the outset. I have seen that it can be challenging to work across companies. There are legal reasons we can't always share information related to competition. And a lot of times we're just too busy, but we've done a much better job in industry, I think, of coordinating across certain spaces, especially in minor safety and counterterrorism work. But we're trying to expand this to other areas, some really exciting initiatives going on, and just coming to an event like this is really how we think of new ideas in terms of how we can share information better. So safety by design, better collaboration, or anything else that comes to mind, what are you thinking about or excited about when it comes to kind of shifting toward that preventative aspect of trust and safety?
So I think it's really important that we understand what safety by design means, and we can define it, and we can help our teams understand it as well. And as Jeff said, it's really this thoughtful development to encourage thoughtful development. So being proactive versus reactive, rather than retrofitting safety guards after an issue has occurred, provide technology companies with tools to think about how they should minimize threats and harms. And in the generative AI space, it's been particularly interesting to see this develop, because we were able to get ahead of the curve a little bit. And this whole concept should really be expanded. And when you think about how the life cycle of machine learning and AI is develop, deploy, and maintain. Now, don't ask me any detailed questions about this. I am not a data scientist, but each of the parts of this process here are really important to prioritize, because it provides opportunities to provide child safety. So let me give you an example. So engaging in red teaming sessions for these generative AI companies, that's the practice of stress testing the systems to try to make it do bad things so you can see what those harms are. And when you pressure test these systems and around particular themes and content, like what prompts can be used to produce AI-generated CSAM, you can incorporate the technical barriers to producing that harmful content if you stay ahead of it. So you can base the model against outputting child nudity or sexual content involving children, but again, you have to do that in a preventative sort of way. You can also remove harmful content from training data, like hashing and matching the data against hashes and known sets of hashes of CSAM, or using classifiers for manual review. So these are the things that you can do when you're developing. And then as you kind of deploy and maintain, there's this cycle that developers go through that will allow them to be able to stay ahead of the curve as best we can.
What comes to mind for you, Tim?
Yeah, I completely agree with that point about proactivity, and I think it's really important to understand that there are some brilliant organizations out there, obviously beyond ours, who are doing some fantastic work in terms of being able to drive forward innovation and being able to not just provide services, but in some scenarios as well, open sourcing tools, which can be really, really beneficial and really, really impactful outside the space. I can think of many ways in which, to echo that in terms of from a hash sharing perspective, standards are being really driven forwards. From our perspective, Tech Against Terrorism, we have an open source content moderation interface, which we're very happy to support. So I think from a collaborative perspective, it's really vital that organizations in this space continue to share not just technical capabilities, but to be able to share some of the learnings about how things can be done in a better way.
I love it. Okay, let's open it up to questions. Anyone have any questions for these two speakers, organizations?
3 speakers. You count 2.
3. Anybody? Okay.
So the question is,
And maybe say who you are and where you're from.
hi, I'm TR09 from Maryland Tradition, work on terrorism, violent extremists, content and works on behaviors online. So work a lot in parallel with Tech Against Terrorism on things. We're seeing that a lot of the content that we are dealing with, at least, it kind of exists in the gray zones between kind of things that are protected that are happening over here and the content not, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great question. And by the way, Bjorn's going to be on a panel tomorrow morning. I don't know if you're on more than just that one, but we'll get to hear more from him. Awesome. I love that this isn't a huge group, so a lot of people are speaking, and it's great interaction. So that is a tough question at the crux of a lot of trust and safety work that I've dealt with at different companies, how you deal with differences in culture and attitude and then of laws in different countries. It's for our work at AWS, it's not that complex actually, because we have our acceptable use policy, which we apply the same around the world. It's a little different than I've seen at like user-generated content companies like at TikTok, where we actually did take different approaches, different parts of the world. Like what you would allow on that For You feed in TikTok in Brazil is gonna be different than in India. And actually, we were banned from India when I was there. You really do have to look at both the local regulations and the culture. and it's challenging. It's hard to win. I mean, AWS does see different, this whole issue of splintering of the internet, you know, that's a challenge for all of us. But when it comes to the content issues, we don't really have the same challenges that UGC companies have. But I wonder, like Tech Against Terrorism and working with a number of companies, how you think about this issue.
Yeah, so I think it's super important. I think in terms of what we consider in scope or out of scope, you know, we follow very, very closely the internationally recognized designation of either be it around particular groups or particular threshold which must be followed. I think for that gives us a fairly robustly and sort of broadly recognized threshold to be able to consider what is and isn't TVEC. That being said, I completely agree. There is certainly a grey area, and I think, you know, for organisations like ours as well as platforms, you know, there will always be a challenge there. I think there's a huge responsibility on the regulators in the various jurisdictions, and certainly at Tech Against Terrorism, we have a really strong relationship with lots of regulators who both consult us in terms of how they should be defining and how they should be ruling against certain things. But also from our perspective, you know, we consult with them just to make sure that we're completely super clear and that we're making sure that we are operating within the rule of law, as is our core mission.
As you can imagine, this one doesn't apply to me very much because CCM is pretty clearly CCM no matter where you are in the world or what culture you belong to, and it's illegal. And I think everywhere. I should probably know that. But what I do think is the challenge that we have around this is whether or not companies have the right to go into private spaces or areas or have encrypted areas where CCM could be being traded or sold. And so that is one, I think, of probably a main concern that Thorn or that I have specifically related to this. We need to be able to protect children. And when bad actors can hide behind encrypted environments, that really makes things a lot more challenging and puts children's lives at risk.
But yeah, those are great, honest answers. But it is a tricky issue that I think some of the industry organizations have done a good job really surfacing discussions. But it's something that's ripe for more discussion, kind of on the margins of some of these meetings, because it's something that's not going to end, and we have to grapple with those gray areas in trust and safety. Any other questions, please?
Hi, thank you so much for this wonderful panel. My name is Stephanie Quintal with We Protect Global Alliance. So we work closely with Thorn, with Amazon. We are illegal and then making it illegal.
Yes, I think, for example, with AI models, you know, many of these are open source, as you might say. A lot of AI models have some of these protections built into them, but I think increasingly we're seeing that some of the very, very sophisticated actors are able to not just sort of break down some of the guardrails that are in place within these models so that they can be used by bad actors and can be exploited in a much greater way outside of some of the more mainstream models that you might be using elsewhere. I don't know if you've got anything else you want to say.
The only thing I would say is your point around like deep fakes is essentially what you're talking about, I think, is, at least that's how I would define the question that you answered, or you asked. We just, Thorn just published a research report. We do really amazing research. I can say that because I'm not on the research team, but my amazingly intelligent colleagues do some fantastic research. And if you go to thorn.org/research, you can find tons of different reports that we put out. This last one was specific to deep fakes and the impact that has on young people. There was a recent one on sextortion, another one on LGBTQ children and the impacts that CCM has on them that are different. So instead of me saying what I think the future holds and have a crystal ball up here, I would say check out our research because they're going to have some more accurate details and statistics for your reference there.
I would say one thing this makes me think is the acceleration of Gen AI has surprised those working in the field, and they've really been amazed at how things have really proceeded so rapidly. So I think for those of us in this general trust and safety space, it's really incumbent on us to try to stay as cutting edge as possible. I mean, it's challenging unless you're one of the people who is really like going in, trying to get in the threat actor mindset and like surfing the dark web. But for me, that means trying to read as much as possible and then learn from people here who are studying it, because we can't really just have our teams work on the rules for the problems of today. Like, we've really got to look at how things are advancing. On the deepfake issue, I've talked the last few years to Hani Farid, who's he is one of the foremost experts in this area, and he's worked in the child safety space for a long time. He's now a professor at Berkeley. He's been on safety councils at companies like TikTok. But I remember him telling me a couple years ago that this technology was coming, and he had one of his students demonstrate it to him, where they were like on a Zoom call with him, and like it wasn't that great. And then like 6 months later, he said, "Oh, like this is shocking. Like they really sound like a different person they're trying to impersonate." And then it got to the point where different governments, defense departments are concerned that, you know, people are going to impersonate generals. And he was just shocked at how fast this happened. Yeah. And that's just like the deep fake space. So I think that's something that really makes it, again, important for all of us to try to stay on the cutting edge and share information as much as we can. Okay, I think we are out of time, and so we want to keep things running. Maybe 30 seconds to just close for each of you. Any parting thoughts for the group here?
Thanks for having me. Go to thorn.org
short
if you have
and
any
sweet.
questions.
Ditto. Yeah, I think it's been some really interesting talks today, and yeah, really keen to meet lots of people and find out more about how other organizations' challenges.
Yeah, and this is small enough. It's such a great event, so we have a lot of time to meet each other. But thank you very much. Really insightful answers, and appreciate everyone coming.